Welcome to Country First Action Foundation's Lesson Number 9, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. In the smoldering ruins of World War II, the United States faced a decision that would define the next century. After two devastating world wars, many Americans were understandably weary. The temptation to turn inward, to focus on rebuilding at home, to retreat from the burdens of foreign conflict, was strong. But our leaders chose differently. They chose engagement, they chose responsibility, and most importantly, they chose to lead. In 1949, the United States joined with 11 other nations to form the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO. It was more than a military pact. It was a statement of purpose. It said to the world, the United States stands with its allies. We will not abandon our friends. We will not allow aggression to go unchecked. Article 5 of the treaty was a radical commitment. An attack on one would be treated as an attack on all. It was a clear and direct message to Joseph Stalin and the Soviet Union. The West would not be bullied, divided, or defeated. This was America at its best, strong, principled, and prepared to shoulder the mantle of leadership in a dangerous world. From the moment of its creation, NATO became the linchpin of Western security during the Cold War. As Soviet tanks rolled into Eastern Europe and communist regimes took root behind the Iron Curtain, NATO stood firm. It wasn't just the nuclear arsenal of the United States or the number of troops stationed in Germany that deterred the Soviets. It was the unity, credibility, and resolve of the alliance. American presidents, from Truman to Eisenhower to Kennedy and beyond, upheld NATO not out of charity, but because it was in our national interest. Keeping Europe free meant keeping America safe. Containing Soviet expansion was not just a European problem, it was a global challenge, and the front line began in the heart of the continent. But it was under President Ronald Reagan that NATO reached the pinnacle of moral clarity and strategic confidence. Reagan understood that freedom was worth defending and that tyranny, if left unchecked, would not stop at someone else's border. He rebuilt our military, recommitted to our alliances, and spoke with the moral force of a leader unafraid to call evil by its name. He challenged Soviet aggression not with appeasement, but with strength, not with confusion, but with clarity. And in the end, it was that strength, backed by NATO's unity, that helped bring down the Berlin Wall and end the Cold War without a shot fired across Western Europe. When the Cold War ended, many predicted NATO would fade into irrelevance. Instead, it adapted and grew. Former Soviet satellites, from Poland to the Baltic states, clamored to join NATO. These were nations that had lived under Moscow's thumb. They knew firsthand what a world without American leadership looked like. They didn't join NATO out of fear, they joined out of hope. Hope that the United States would not abandon its post. Hope that liberty would still have a shield. NATO took on new missions: peacekeeping in the Balkans, counterterrorism in Afghanistan, and cooperation with partners around the globe. After the attacks on September 11, 2001, it was NATO that invoked Article 5 for the first and only time in its history, not to defend Europe, but to defend America. Our allies stood with us in Afghanistan. They didn't hesitate. They didn't negotiate. They responded. That kind of solidarity isn't bought, it's earned. And it's one of the greatest strategic assets the United States has ever had. Today, the threats to freedom look different than they did in 1949, but they are no less real. Russia, under Vladimir Putin, has invaded its neighbors, undermined Western democracies, and launched a full-scale war against Ukraine, the most blatant land grab in Europe since World War II. Meanwhile, China rises as a strategic competitor, Iran continues to sponsor terror, and rogue actors test the resolve of the free world at every turn. In this environment, NATO is not just relevant, it is essential. Under American leadership, NATO has strengthened its eastern flank, coordinated unprecedented support for Ukraine, and expanded with the historic inclusion of Finland and Sweden. These are nations who understand that neutrality is no longer a shield, and that only a strong alliance, backed by American strength, can preserve peace. There is a reason Putin fears NATO. It is the most successful military alliance in human history, not because it wages wars, but because it prevents them. There are those who argue that NATO is a burden, that America pays too much, gets too little, and should stop policing the world. That argument misunderstands both history and strategy. America doesn't invest in NATO out of generosity. We invest in NATO because it serves our interests. It deters adversaries. It stabilizes global markets. It prevents the kinds of world wars that cost American lives and treasure. It gives us forward presence, intelligence cooperation, and interoperable forces. And it allows the United States to lead without standing alone. In an increasingly complex world, alliances are force multipliers, and NATO is the crown jewel of those alliances. President Reagan didn't see NATO as a drain. He saw it as a pillar of American leadership. He believed, as we should still believe, that a strong America is a secure America. And that strength comes not just from weapons, but from the values we defend and the allies who stand with us. For 75 years, NATO has stood the test of time. It has preserved peace through strength. It has adapted to new threats without losing sight of its purpose. And it has proven time and again that American leadership is not just necessary, it is irreplaceable. Ronald Reagan reminded us that freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. It must be defended, cherished, and passed on. NATO is part of that defense, not just for Europe, but for the United States, not just for today, but for the world we hope to leave to our children. We should never apologize for leading. We should never retreat from our responsibilities. Because the price of liberty is eternal vigilance, and the reward is a safer, freer, more prosperous world. That is the promise of NATO. That is the legacy of American leadership. And that is a cause worth continuing. Thank you for joining us today to learn about the importance of NATO. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out at the email address on the screen, and we will get back to you as soon as possible.